The next unit is cell structure and function. So we're finally into cells. So the objectives for this unit is to describe the structural components of plant, animal, bacteria cells, and also the structural components of viruses. And then we will work on explaining mechanisms of passive and active transport across cell membranes. So we're going to start with the first objective, the structural components of plant, animal, bacteria, cells, and viruses. So we'll start with the cell theory, and this sort of just is the basis for cytology, or the study of cells. So all living things are made of cells. If it's a living thing, it's going to be made of cells. And things that are not living are not made of cells. And cells are the basic units of structure and function for living things. So they're like the building blocks. And their structure is going to determine their function, and that's how the organism is going to be able to function. And then all cells are produced from existing cells. Now, that begs the question, where did the first cell come from? And we will address that question, but not in this unit. Okay. Cells have a variety of different shapes, and their shape is related to how they function. So some cells are flat, and some cells are long, and some cells can change shape. Some cells are big, some cells are small, but the shape is related to the functionality of the cell. So we can look at this kind of hierarchy here of size, and we did an activity in class with this. All right, so here's a human height. So this is about the average height of a human, and then we can move down to the largest cells, which would be found in like a chicken egg. And you can see, remember we talked about how long a nerve cell can be. So some of the length of some nerve cells are almost the height of a human. And then a frog egg. Now we get down into here, and this is where most of the cells are going to be found. And you need a light microscope to be able to see in this area. And then if we go smaller, we have the bacteria. And we did this in class. But cells are small, and the reason that cells are small, we don't have big organisms that are just one cell rolling down the hallway, because cells can only be a certain size. And the reason for that is they need to get nutrients into the cell, and they need to get waste out of the cell. And where they do that is on the surface of the cell. So that would be like the surface area of the cell. But the bigger they get, the more nutrients they need, and the more waste products they're going to be producing and need to get rid of. And the problem is, as we increase the diameter of a sphere, this could be a box, it doesn't matter, we end up decreasing the ratio of surface area to volume. So this cell here has a surface area of 12.6 and a volume of 4.2, which gives you a ratio of 3. If we double the size of it, we decrease the area to volume ratio by half. Increase it again, and we're decreasing it. And what ends up happening is you need more stuff in, but there's not enough surface area for that to happen. We're producing more waste, and there's not enough surface area to get rid of that. So what we see instead of big cells is lots of little cells. And so you're made up of lots and lots of little cells. And that makes it so that you can have as much mass, but you maintain the surface area to volume ratio. So that's why cells are small. Okay, there are two major groups of cells, prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Pro means beginning, before, and the karyote means kernel. So before the kernel, and what they call the kernel was, they could see this dark spot inside of the cell, which we now know is the nucleus. And so eukaryotes, eu means true. So these are the true kernels. So the prokaryotes are the more simplistic cells, and we find these in bacteria. Okay, no matter whether you're a prokaryotic cell or a eukaryotic cell, all cells have three components. They all have a cell membrane. Cell membrane is what gives them a barrier between them and their environment. Without a membrane, it wouldn't be a cell. It would just be, within the rest of the stuff. It's not separating it into a unit. They all have cytoplasm, and that's the space in between the cell membrane and, if there's a nucleus, the nucleus. And this is where all the organelles, if they have them, would be found. And then finally, they all have genetic material at some point. For an example of a cell that no longer has genetic material is your red blood cells. The red blood cells had genetic material, but they actually spit it out at some point. So, but at one point in their lives, early on, they had genetic material. Okay, so we'll start with prokaryotes. And these are basically two groups, the eubacteria, or you would know that it's just bacteria, true bacteria, and archaea, which are the ancient bacteria. And we're going to study these in more detail in a unit later in the year. But prokaryotes in general do not have internal membranes, which means they don't have all of those organelles that you've been coloring and describing. So they don't have a mitochondria, they don't have chloroplasts, they don't have any of those organelles. Most of them do have cell walls, though, and they have things that are not organelles. They do have genetic material, like I said before. They have ribosomes. They're going to have a cell membrane or a plasma membrane, and some of them have flagella for movement. Eukaryotes include all the other groups of organisms. So protists, which are unicellular small organisms, plants, which you know, animals, which you know, and fungi. We've worked a little bit with fungi, with yeast, mushrooms, and so on. Those are all eukaryotes. They all have organelles, and those organelles have membranes around them. And the fungi and the plants also have cell walls. Not the same kind of cell wall as a bacteria, but they have cell walls as well. This is just a comparison of a prokaryotic cell and a eukaryotic cell. If you haven't done so already, you'll be looking at a cheek cell under the microscope. This is a cheek cell, and I'm kind of going around the membrane of the cheek cell. This is the nucleus of the cheek cell. All these little specks are bacteria. There's actually two of them here, one of them here. So those are the size difference between a prokaryote and a eukaryote. The prokaryote is like a speck on the eukaryotic cell. All right, and then finally we have viruses. And viruses are very simple. They are just a protein coat. They do not have a cell membrane. So they have these little protein, little purple blobs here represent all the little proteins. And inside of that is the genetic material. So they have genetic material just like us, but their genetic material could be RNA, where in us it's always DNA. Okay. The other thing that you need to know is the three major differences between plant and animal cells. So plants contain three structures that make them different. First, they have a large central vacuole. That's filled mostly with water, and it pushes out on the cell wall of the plant and gives the plant structure. If you don't water your plants, they wilt, and that's because they've lost the water in their central vacuole. And when you water them again, if it hasn't been too long, that central vacuole will fill back up with water, and then they'll be able to be upright again. They have chloroplasts, chloroplasts are actually in a group of organelles called plastids. You just need to know that they have chloroplasts and they're green. And then finally, they have a cell wall, and that helps to give them structure. And that cell wall contains cellulose, which is not digestible by us. That's the fiber they talk about in your diet. So those are the three differences. And that's the end of the first lecture. Thank you.